Dawson's Rambles.
Hey YouTube, Dawson Rider here. Welcome to my next video in my Power Rangers ranking series where I'm ranking every Ranger of every color, primarily the main original colors, in honor of the upcoming Once and Always special. This series will likely run through when Once and Always debuts, because, you know, I'm me. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started with my top 5 Yellow Rangers. Now, as always, I always give this disclaimer, even though people still get mad in the comments anyway. This is just my personal list. This is not me saying this is the right list or I ran an algorithm. It's just my personal list. We all have our own different tastes. Now, as always, I like to start with some honorable mentions. First of all, I'm going to go for Taylor from Wild Force, who I think is an underrated, badass female Yellow Ranger. I think in general of that little era of time, Jen always gets the credit for being the badass female Ranger, but I think Taylor is just as cool. She's not as front and center, but she was very similar to Jen in the sense that she was kind of a leader and co-leader. In fact, she did lead the Wild Force Rangers before Cole showed up, and they're like, hey, let's let this lunatic Red show up and be the leader. Story of Sentai's life. But she led the team before he even got there, and she still acted as a pseudo co-leader. She was badass. She had given up her time in the Air Force to pick up a duty as a Ranger. You know, I just always thought she was a really cool and underrated character. Another underrated pick, or not underrated, I don't know actually how well liked he is, but another honorable mention pick is Dustin from Ninja Storm. I always just really liked Dustin. Dustin? I don't even know his name. I don't have a right to talk about him. I don't even know the dude's name. So anyway, Dustin. No, I'm just kidding. Dustin checks in. Okay, I swear I'm done with the jokes. Probably not, because this is a me video. Anyway, Dustin. I always really liked Dustin. I just thought he was a really fun character. I'm always a sucker for the characters that are just having fun being a superhero and kind of acknowledging it in a meta way. See, I knew it, dude. Power Rangers are real. So yeah, I just always really liked Dustin. Just he was a fun, lovable character. But now let's get on to the actual top 5. Coming in at number 5 is Jack, Hyperforce Yellow. Now, I like Jack for a couple reasons. Number 1, it's really cool that Paul Schreier got to play him. You know, I know that he technically looks sort of different from the art and stuff, but I always see him as like a bulk variant in my head, like a la Loki. Not that he's necessarily bulk, but you know what I mean. He was a lookalike. If we can have 15 million versions of someone that looks like Data in Star Trek, let me have this one. Like, seriously, he did not need to come back in every season. Like, in season 2, it was just too much. Of Picard I'm talking about. Anyway, this isn't a review of Picard. Getting to see Paul Schreier get to play a Ranger in any form was really cool, just on like a franchise level because of how long he's been a part of it. And this is going to sound funny to say that people haven't watched it, but in his performance, he did a really good job. You got to give credit to the Hyperforce characters. When they did like scenes, especially serious stuff, they really got into the parts and made you feel like they were actual characters, you know. And I thought that, you know, it's funny seeing years of him as a comedic character in bulk, that he had a very rangerly presence, a heroic presence, a really nice mentor presence as well. And that's the other thing I like about the character, is I thought it was an interesting character to have in that season, which is, or series, whatever you want to call it, is kind of a classic setup of, you know, academy students becoming Rangers, but then amongst them you have this one beat cop character. I thought that was kind of a cool idea for the Time Force world and for the character dynamics, and so I did really love to get to see effectively Bulk be a Ranger, but it was also a really cool character, I thought. Like, he wasn't like the most interesting or intriguing or dark, but he was a really likable, heroic, noble character that I think had an interesting role in the story. Number 4 is Tanya. Tanya is easily my favorite of like the original trio. That's not like a trio, but the original 3 Yellow Rangers, you know. I was never a huge Trini fan. I liked Aisha a little more just because I found her to be more memorable, but Tanya was just really cool. You know, we did have a little bit of her learning to become a Ranger and learning to get used to the world and the characters as she was technically new, but Tanya right away was kind of a badass. Like, she didn't take no guff from anybody, and she would just, I just really liked Tanya, especially rewatching. It's like funny how I was like, wow, Tanya was a badass. It could also be kind of funny as well. Like, I remember that line in Turbo where she said, I guess this ain't the Love Boat. I mean, it's not the funniest line, but it's just the way she delivered it. She's just always a Yellow Ranger I've really liked. Again, it's one of those ones I don't know about the fandom, like general consensus, but I find her to be kind of underrated because most people remember Trini or Aisha, but I thought Tanya was the best one. Honestly, if they had brought Tanya back instead of Aisha, even though she's not mmpr for Once and Always, I wouldn't have been mad at all. Number 3 is Don't Call Her Kira. Now, I feel like the Dino Thunder Rangers are almost all making it on these lists, but I really liked Kira. Thank you, Catherine Obvious. That's why she's number 3 on this list. But like all the Dino Thunder Rangers, she was a very flawed character. She wasn't perfect, and we get to see her grow over the course of the series. And I like how she didn't fit in any of the boxes of like the traditional Yellow or Pink Ranger roles, being the only girl Ranger of the series. But like with Connor and Ethan, you see her kind of closed off at the beginning, very closed off especially to those particular characters, and we get to see her come out of her shell and really grow and change as a person as the series goes on, which is something I appreciate about the Disney era. These characters that aren't perfect, that feel more closer to normal human beings, that we get to see it grow and change, and even by the end of the series, they still aren't like quote-unquote fixed, like I mentioned with Connor in my previous video. They still have some work to do on themselves, and they've changed for the better, but they've still held on to who they are. Number 2 is Summer. Now, Summer's story is cliche. You know, she becomes a zombie, starts eating people's brains, taking on their personalities. Then she moves to a B&B with ghosts. In all seriousness, though, Rose McIver has done some awesome shows since After PR, like iZombie and Ghosts. Go check them out. They're both fantastic. But in all seriousness, like, how great is Ghosts? No, for real though, this time I'm really gonna start talking about Summer. Summer's story is kind of a cliche one in a way, but for Power Rangers, I thought it was a really unique spin on the character. You know, you had her backstory, which I think is my favorite Ranger-focused episode of all the Ranger Yellow, Ranger Red episodes we did. You find out she was kind of a spoiled brat, and then it was through effectively what happened at the end of the world that pushed her into becoming a better person. You know, washing the death of her butler. How would that work? Is that like covering it up? Watching the death of her butler, you know, was this, it sounds like a funny thing to say, but it was like a, you know, a wake-up call moment for her, someone that had always been there for her, that she didn't treat the best, you know, getting to actually get out there and help people in the apocalyptic fall. I think that episode did a great job at showcasing her character development and change in such a short amount of time. And it's just this cool idea of this sort of debutante, spoiled character becoming this badass hero. Not to mention, again, Rose McIver is always a win. For number 1, though, it is Comic Trini, just like Comic Jason was my favorite Red. Spoiler alert, now you don't have to watch the Red video. Watch it, please. But Comic Trini is just she's so cool. Like, again, much like with Jason, I was never a Trini fan. I always found her to be kind of boring and forgettable, if I'm being honest with you, but this series actually made her so much more of an interesting character. Now, I know some things that people bring up about show Trini they like is her compassion and empathy, which I think they do still hold on to here in a lot of scenes, especially early on in the earliest arc of the Boom comics when they actually do a realistic version of Tommy joining the team where he's kind of mistrusted, and she's one of the ones that's most willing to give him a chance. And I think they do show those moments of compassion, but really she's just been so unexpectedly interesting and cool as we've watched her develop into this stronger and stronger character, eventually taking up the mantle of the Red Omega Ranger. And as it's happened, it's felt natural. It hasn't felt like something that was just done out of nowhere or anything like that. It feels like, oh, that makes a lot of sense as we've watched her build. I mean, you sort of hinted at it in the color swap arc and stuff like that. I'm talking about her as Red Ranger. I know this is Yellow Ranger list, but I'm just saying at the end of the day, her progression was nice, and I most remember her as a Yellow Ranger. She's only been a Red Ranger for like 5 minutes here. But I'm just saying, using that as an example to highlight that her progression has felt natural as she's grown into this interesting and strong character, a better Ranger, this interesting Ranger. And not to mention she has one of my most favorite badass moments when they're fighting Kia, and they have that sort of almost Luke Kylo scene where he's like, "Did you come here to save my soul?" And she's like, "No." You just wouldn't expect that from regular Trini. Just Comic Trini is so good. Not to mention I have an extra soft spot for the character because it took this character that I hardly gave a second thought in mmpr and made her into one of my favorites, or at least a variant of her. But that is just my list. Let me know what your guys' list of your favorite Yellow Rangers are in the comments as always. Until next time, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps, ring that bell so you get notifications for my videos. Awesome Rider, signing out.